The topic is on technology and tools, identifying an effective tool chain. And our panelist for today, who's coming on stage, Mr. Naresh Chowdhury, AVP and Tools Ed Infosys. Put your hands together. Let's welcome Mr. Naresh once again on stage. He was a speaker this morning. Mr. Naresh Chowdhury, AVP and Tools at Infosys. Joining him on stage, our next panelist, Mr. Abhishek Kant, Country Manager, Telerik Progress Software Company. And we also have Mr. Eddy pawels. A warm welcome to all of them. And we have Sreerupa Sen, STSM, IBM, and Mr. Tejasvi Kumar, Director, Alliance, Microsoft. I would request all the panelists to kindly come on stage and take your seats. Let's welcome all the panelists with a bigger round of applause. And joining all the panelists on the stage, our moderator Mr. Walter Heck, CFO founder, Olin Data. A very, very warm welcome to you, sir.
We're here for a discussion about the effectiveness of tools and how they integrate together. I think that the crowd here is mostly already familiar with DevOps at a certain level, so we'll stick mostly to tools and how they integrate together. Before we get started, I would like to give all of the panel members just a 1 minute time to introduce themselves and maybe an opening thought, and then I'll start the discussion.
Thanks, Walter. So my name is Naresh. Some of you probably saw me speaking about tools in the morning, first half. So I have been with Infosys for about 15 years, done various roles. Right now I'm looking at reuse tools and open source. That's my primary interest, and that's what I'm driving for the company right now. So I have some opinions and thoughts about tools, and very keen to share some of those with you, and also get back feedback from all of you.
Yeah, my name is Eddy pawels. You probably remember me from this morning. I still remember what DevOps is. So my view around tooling and effective tool chain is focus on simplicity, try to make sure that you have the right collaboration and you get the work done from end to end. And effectiveness eventually means that it actually is effective for the business that you're in and for the customers that you're dealing with.
Well, I think amongst all, I'm the freshest in your mind. I was here speaking about 15 minutes ago. All right, I'm Abhishek. I work with Telerik, a progress company. So my interest, obviously, as I outlined before, is to make sure software, when it goes out to people, is something that they will like to use and like to enjoy. So when we're talking about different tool chains, my perspective is to focus on abilities. So abilities would include usability, interoperability, and we have to think about these abilities that we have, which is diversity. I mean, there are a lot of those abilities that one has to think about. So I'm more interested in exploring those areas, which abilities different tool chains can bring to the table.
Hi, my name is Rupa. I work for IBM. I'm a software developer and an architect. My team and I, we build a team collaboration tool that kind of fits into the dev part of IBM's DevOps story. So I guess I'm here more like as a tools provider to see if I can offer a different perspective than to tools users. That's all.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. It's nice to see so many people late in the evening. Let me introduce myself. My name is Tejasvi Kumar. I work in Microsoft. I focus on alliances. That's what I do for a living. But in terms of my interest in tools and technologies, I've actually spent a lot of my time, my career on these areas. So I'm pretty passionate about it, and I'll be more than happy to kind of, take any of these questions from the audience, and would be, nice to kind of interact amongst ourselves. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you very much, everyone. When we started the discussion in the back room, one of the first things that came to my mind is a very simple example. I'm currently consulting for a company in Holland, a big enterprise environment, And when we just started a couple of weeks ago, and one of the first things that happened was that I needed to talk to other members of the team. And there is a certain standard chat software that is used within that corporation. But I faced very simple problems like having a group discussion. If I was entering a group discussion and I happened to close the window of the group discussion, somebody else who was in that group needed to invite me back into the same group discussion. Otherwise, I would start a new group discussion. Other things that it didn't support was, for instance, there is no API to feed information into this software. Within engineering teams these days, it's quite common to have either an IRC server or maybe a Slack or a Jabber or a HipChat server where you can have other tools post information. That way, the same place where you collaborate and you talk to each other, you can also see the progress of what your infrastructure is doing. So this was a very simple example of things that we couldn't do. I brought it up in one of the team meetings of that engineering team, and we decided to try out, in this case, HipChat. And it's quite an interesting example of where a simple tool can make or break the effectiveness of a whole team. So one of the first things I wanted to talk about is this simple effectiveness of tools where we are looking at standardization of having an API level where we can talk between different tools. And I was wondering how you guys feel about this specific situation where...
I think you hear me? I think in terms of standardization, I think it would really be good if people or if tools actually would at least use the same definitions. I think one of the reasons why you have so many people in the audience is because nobody has a clue about what DevOps really means, and everybody has its own definition. Same is true when you talk about collaborating or when you talk about different items in each of the tools. They all have their own definition. So I think it would be more hard to actually standardize at the technology front, but if people would, similar to what you see in frameworks like ITIL, have at least a conceptual definitional framework that makes sure that the definitions are the same, then at least integration and collaboration will become a lot easier.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the simple when you look at any knowledge domain, having a definition of what the terms inside that domain mean is a very good start. And I think because DevOps it's a very simple word, right? And we all work in a DevOps environment, but the actual on-the-ground situation is so vastly different from enterprise to enterprise that's the tricky part.
And one last comment in terms of effectiveness is that effectiveness actually is highly dictated by what is it that you want with your company and how effective is my tool chain in order to be able to deliver value to my customer. So like the example that you gave with chat was, as I heard, very inefficient and very ineffective in your situation. In the company I worked for before, we actually had a very effective collaboration tool set. So from that side, we didn't have that issue. So it all depends on what is it that you want to achieve, look at it from an end-to-end perspective, and then assess and measure whether or not it's effective or not. And if it's not, try to identify how you can improve it.
So if I could add, so it also depends on what level of standardization organizations really want to drive. So for example, in our case, there is a certain level of standardization that the organization would want to drive. And then, the next level of stuff is something that the teams can decide for themselves. So I think in this example, I think this would be something in our world that would be decided by the team on the ground and not something that would be dictated from the corporate. So it's just the team has to figure out what's best for them in terms of using the collaboration tool and go ahead and use it. And I'm sure, this would vary by the organization, but that's the approach that best sort of works.
Yeah, so this is one of the approaches, right? I mean, we talked about that for every problem and for every solution we introduce new problems. So I agree. For an engineering team, the functionality of chat software is very different than it is for, I don't know, support staff or front-facing staff. So we have different requirements of something that seems to be the same tool. And I think that what you say, leaving this, the decision up to the teams themselves is a good idea, but it also introduces a plethora of tools, because if we let everybody decide their own solution, then we end up with 20 different chat tools, and then it turns out that I can no longer talk to the person 3 departments away because they don't happen to be using the same tool. And, yeah.
Yeah, so I've got a point of view on this as well. Within Microsoft, when you think about standardization, right, the first thing that we noticed is how many tools do individuals really use on a day-in, day-out basis. And what we figured is it's definitely not one. They use 5, 6 different interfaces. I'd rather use the word interfaces rather than calling it tools. So 6 or 7 different interfaces, one to write code, one to kind of feed in data because my senior management requires some amount of information and so on and so forth. So when we think about standardization, the first thing that we focused on is depending on the kind of role that you play in your organization, you should be able to just go and do that particular activity. The data in the backend should be automatically collected. It should go into a single repository. The tools, the integrations, all of that should be seamless. We should have the right kind of APIs exposed. The data should automatically go back, and then we should be able to pull out the right kind of report so that the right people can look at this information. So that's the kind of view that we take within Microsoft, which I'm assuming kind of applies to most organizations today.
In my mind, I think interoperability is one of the most important things, right? So most of the tools that you see today for DevOps, they have a bunch of APIs and they're very extensible, and it's fairly easy to kind of integrate them with other tools. And I've seen that there's almost an explosion of integrations. Now, whether that's good or bad, I don't know. But it's almost, any tool you look at, right? We've looked at Chef, Puppet, anything. It has a plethora of integrations with a whole bunch of other tools which are kind of complementary. So it's not really standardization, but it's, I guess, one way of getting there, right? It's basically the intent of standardization is that everything that you have works together, maybe follows the same API or looks at data in a particular manner. And I think with interoperability, we've kind of achieved that aspect of it, but it's just that it's more fragile because there are so many APIs that you have to deal with.
Yeah, to hook in on that, I agree. I think that the standardization that we have now is more on a communications level. A decent tool should probably have some kind of REST API, which guarantees that we can talk on an HTTP protocol with a simple API calls. That works really well. What Eddy said in his presentation this morning was struck me very much. How you should look at your tool chain and identify for each tool, do you use it? Yes. If so, does it integrate well with other tools? If not, you should probably look at some other tool, because you want bidirectional integration between your tools. Just pulling or just pushing information to other tools is not always enough. For instance, in a continuous integration setup, let's pick a random example, Jenkins. You want to be able to push information in there, but you also want to be able to get information out of there, and it needs to be properly integrated with the rest of your tools. And what I'm sure you're about to say as well is that it also needs to be about the whole picture, the whole effectiveness of the tool chain as a whole for the business, and not just on an individual tool level.
A kind of, yes. But integration actually is just one part of it, and that's actually what I want to say is that it's good to have a bidirectional interface. It's good to actually see that tools that you use are effective, but at the same time, I'm actually getting pockets of information, and if I would like to work effective, then I need to understand how am I doing, and I need to get the right insight. And if you have like a dozen type of tools that all actually have a bidirectional interface, it's all fine, but I have part of my truth in tool A, part of my truth in tool B. So at the end, I still need to have a good way to aggregate that data, harmonize it, and actually normalize it in order to be able to make sense about what I'm seeing. And that's another aspect in terms of standardization or collaboration in general that is needed in order to get an effective tool chain. Because otherwise you end up having, again, sub-optimization, because it works, it actually integrates to some point, but in order to measure from end to end whether or not it's successful and effectively enough for addressing my business needs, I'm still missing that. So that's a second aspect that also needs to be considered.
I agree. I saw a very interesting presentation by James Turnbull. He used to be the CTO at Docker. Before that, he worked at Puppet Labs. He had a presentation about monitoring tools and how most engineering departments are doing monitoring wrong. We are often focused on monitoring CPU levels, hard disk space, whether a server is working, that kind of stuff. If you look at companies like, I believe he named Etsy as an example, their monitoring infrastructure, the main metric they're monitoring is the amount of money in the shopping baskets on the website. And from there, you can drill down and go into more detailed level and eventually end up with the CPU level statistics on that specific web server 23 or something. But in order for your engineering department to have a high level overview, you should also implement that in the very basic layer of something like monitoring, for instance.
So just looking at the people here and people who are actually practicing DevOps right now, I'm pretty sure everybody has spent a significant amount of man hours building their own DevOps tool chain. Now, I mean, if you took the organizations and the amount of time that they have spent doing the same thing over and over again because they were doing it for themselves, vis-a-vis if there was an interoperable or a standardization available, this would have been much, much simpler and faster. Now, it's simple because we have illustrations in the past. When we were programming for the web in terms of ARPANET, there was something very, very specific. Mainframes were very, very specific. When HTTP came, it was pretty much, communications was no more anybody's problem. That was well taken care of. Now, already with the CI, the two main tool that I keep hearing about would be Jenkins, TeamCity, and some of them. But as we go forth from here, and as DevOps matures, they will also start talking about taking the feedback and making automated decisions on how things should improve from the data that DevOps generates. Again, the importance of interoperability comes back, or standardization, howsoever way you look at, but basically to ensure innovations continue to happen while working with each other. I think that is key, because everybody should get their data, but then also should be able to write out data to other people so that other people are able to consume it.
Yeah, so what you said there was is quite interesting, because it's actually going to be my next point, where you said that if we took all of the hours that all of our organizations have spent on setting up an effective DevOps tool chain, we could probably rebuild the world. That boils down to standardization, but my next point was actually going to be the choice of open source tools versus enterprise tools. And this can be either fully open source without a support agreement, where you just literally download the source code from GitHub and good luck with it, to supported open source, where there is a company that you can have a support contract with, to proprietary software. And I'd be interested to hear you guys what your thoughts are about on this topic.
From a lean application delivery standpoint, from a business, I don't really care whether it's proprietary or it's open source, as long as it effectively allows me to do the thing that I need to do, and I can actually do that from an end-to-end basis. So if it's proprietary, I'm expecting that my tool vendor do a lot more for me than I actually have to take it from open source and extend it, or using a supplier that actually is extending open source for me. So it all depends on how much flexibility and what level of investment you as an IT organization wants to do in order to be able to get the flexibility and build the effectiveness that you need to have in order to be able to be called from a business perspective to be an effective tool chain. But from an organizational standpoint, as long as it's effective in a sense that it delivers what it needs to deliver at a cost-effective time, I don't really care where it's coming from, as long as it does what it needs to be doing.
Yeah, I agree with that on a how to say that, on a low level. On a low level, I agree with that. But then when I take a step back and take Abhishek's point again, if we, so I'm a big fan of open source software, so I'm probably quite biased on this. But I think that if we all use the open source software, whether it's the commercial open source or free open source, we spend time fixing our problems in a way so they will be fixed for other organizations as well. And that in itself doesn't really hold an advantage for my organization, but at the flip side of the coin, there's 1,000 organizations out there spending time fixing my problems as well. And this should lead on a theoretical level to standardization as well.
No, and I get that. It's just I'm trying to just take two hats here, because with Clarive we actually use everything based on an open source stack as well. So I know what the value is of open source. I'm just taking my hat of my process improvement manager when I was at a big telco, and from that standpoint, I don't really care whether it was open source, as long as it did what I needed to do from a business perspective. So this is a technical discussion and a religious discussion between what's pro or cons. So I'm for that pure from a technician point of view, but it's a different viewpoint.
Yeah,
I think, as a tools developer, I think it's also industry specific. Like, I've seen that there are a lot of companies, maybe some in the telco market, some that maybe do like software for the army or, some other government agency, that they have like a really big emphasis on, say, auditability, governance, security. And I've seen that such customers typically don't tend to trust open source so much. Like, even there you'll have small teams of really like kind of energetic, enthusiastic developers who actually want to take open source and make it their own and kind of build their own tool chain with it. But usually most of the organization would go with proprietary software developed by like another big organization probably, right? And it's sad that it's not really the technical aspects that govern their decisions. It's sometimes just, whether open source can be trusted or not. I don't know if you've seen that, right? I've seen that quite a bit.
I think that from my perspective at least, I see it changing a little bit. I see that was how it used to be for sure, and how in many companies it still is. But I see that now we are at a stage where those kind of companies, they are willing to adopt open source software. They're just not willing to contribute back. So take the case of Puppet, for instance. Puppet has modules, open source modules available, and I see a lot of different companies adopting Puppet. They take the open source modules, but they are afraid to contribute back to those modules, even if it's just a bug fix, because of the legal implications, maybe business reasons. So I think that's kind of the next level of where we are at now, and maybe there will be a next level where they say, okay, contributing bug fixes is not the end of the world. I mean, I'm not giving up my IP if I change this comma into a semicolon.
And I think it's true. It's a moving target. But to your point, I think it comes down to what you said in terms of security, your business requirements in terms of what you would like to get. And so, at the end, whether or not it's effective is being decided by your acceptance or your success criteria, and that will be dependent on the type of organization, and that will drive your decision in terms of tooling. But at the end, if you ask any business person whether or not open source or proprietary, they don't really care, as long as they say, well, these are my criteria. If you have a cost-effective solution that is efficient and actually does what it needs to be doing, then I'm fine with it.
I think hybrid is the way. I don't see anything where you would have everything end-to-end proprietary. You would end up inserting open source, even if the primary intent is to really go completely proprietary. You would end up inserting open source just because of popularity at times, just because your developers are more familiar and comfortable. So I think hybrid is the way. How much open source, how much proprietary, I think that would depend on organizations. But I mean, you would always have a hybrid. I mean, I don't see a way where you have only open source or only proprietary. I think that's not something that's going to happen.
So I think that what I've been seeing lately is what I call the triple play business model, where we're looking at products that are released as open source software. You could go and download and compile and configure all of it by yourself. There's an on-premise version where the company that builds the software will set it up on-premise for you and gives you a nicely installer-based package. And then there is a cloud-based option where if you happen to have the trust levels within your organization and the business environment where it's okay to have things living in the cloud, then you can use the cloud version and do away with the administration involved in running your own infrastructure. And I think that what you say, this hybrid solution, these kind of business models really play into that. Having a standardized tool be available in different ways so that it is useful for hopefully any organization.
Yeah, absolutely. For example, many of us actually, and I'm sure there are many here in the room as well, we started things like Docker, purely for experimentation's sake, and then gradually, as sort of things matured, things evolved, started looking at the other options where you had paid support and stuff like that. So I think most people start with that mode. So it's going to be, like I said, a hybrid model where you may start experimenting with completely free open source. Then probably as things mature, you have larger adoption, you want some risk mitigation, you look for support and stuff like that, and then maybe you are also willing to pay for it.
Yeah, just to add on to what Naresh mentioned, specifically from an enterprise perspective, you'll have to look at the different dimensions. So when you think about source code specifically, right? Especially in the enterprises today, you obviously need to secure that in a safe place, and from a disaster recovery perspective, availability perspective, the user permissions, authentication, how do you map a particular user to the resources that he or she can actually get access to. Now, these are pretty complicated, and very often you have to deal with some 10 different vendors. Starting from the networking, I need an optic fiber which runs from, say, my Bangalore office to New York office, just because I have a team sitting in, it's a globally distributed model today, right? So when you think from an enterprise perspective, I think it's pretty important that you think about all of these other areas as well, and then think about one single, organization. I wouldn't probably use the word vendor. I kind of agree with the hybrid approach. But you would want to deal with one single vendor who kind of caters to all of these different aspects of, say, source control, which is just one example, which is pretty important.
One of the things I was just thinking about is, in your case, if I can take the liberty to deep dive on Microsoft a little bit, it seems that Microsoft has changed their strategy quite a bit in the last few years by open sourcing a number of technologies that maybe 10 years ago nobody would ever think they would ever be open source.
Absolutely. So we had our CEO, Satya Nadella, very recently. We had this huge banner where it says Microsoft loves Linux. I've been in Microsoft for like close to 10 years now, and never ever have I heard my CEO make those kind of statements. So I think the world has changed a lot. So today, when you think about any of the folks here, the vendors, large vendors, including Microsoft, you can't not just have a proprietary software and keep all the source code to yourself. .NET, most people must be aware about .NET, is open source today. So anyone can just download it and play around with it and bring in your own kind of tweaks. So I totally agree with that, absolutely.
I find it quite interesting. I noticed I got an email this week for an invite for a webinar from Microsoft about running Linux in my Azure environment, and it's an interesting change of direction to see, and I think it is the wise way, because it boils back down to the standardization and integration as well, right? For so long you had a Windows department and a Linux department in your enterprise, and it doesn't need to be that way. It's just it's an artificial boundary that shouldn't be there in the first place, and it boils down to what Eddy says. In the end, it is your business that matters, not the fact that you have a Windows department and a Linux department. It should not be that way. But I hope that these efforts will lead us to have more integration between these tools.
In addition, there's this whole confusion about what open source is. There is this theme that says it should be pure open source. Whosoever uses it should be making it open source. Otherwise, it's a licensing problem if you don't do it. On the other hand, there is this permissive license that says, okay, take what you want, use what you want, how you want to use it. So, I mean, we're still, I think, not over it. We may not worry about it, but it's something that most people should think about. In my view, as I completely agree with the panel in terms of the hybrid approach where the business has to see the ROI. What I see quite a bit missing whenever people are talking about open source ultimately leads to, or what they basically miss out is the man hours they would spend themselves doing the things that they have already done, or if they were going to use open source for. We talk about, oh, I will pay some enterprise guy to come in and do this installation for me and make sure that it runs at 99.999% reliability. Why did you need that in the first place? Couldn't you do it yourself? I mean, if that was so easy to be done. So what I see mostly, the model that has evolved, and I don't know if it's right or wrong, but the model that has evolved is you throw Lego blocks in the mix, but then keep the car to yourself, so that if somebody wants a car, you can sell them the car, but then, hey, take the tire if you want, take the wheel that you want, and then, hey, by the way, the seats were not manufactured by me, it was manufactured by that open source tool. And I'm just going to use it because it's open source. But then I'm going to wanting to sell this car. It's not essentially bad at the same time, because if there is no commercial interest, the whole project is going to die.
So I have a quick comment. So Abhishek, on the tooling front, for example, the risks are much lower with open source, because a lot of the licensing stuff, right, restrictive, permissive, and all of that, actually really comes and hits you when you are making the code part of your applications. But tools are accelerators, so they are really catalysts. They really don't go as deliverables into your app. So the risks are much lower in that sense. So yeah, so unless you are developing a product, right? So if you're using assets, accelerators, and tools to really make your delivery faster, more accelerated, I think there the risks in terms of open source licensing are much lower. So you are just consuming, and I think especially in India, I think we have very few committers back to the community, but I think many of us are now gradually trying to change that, and I think over the next couple of years you will find a lot more people coming forward to commit, and so while we consume, we will also be giving back to the community in terms of patches, fixes, and even features, I'm sure.
I think as a last point to this, the debate about open source versus enterprise software, it boils down to what is the most important to you, right? If you have an engineering-heavy organization, then you can spend the time that is required to build the knowledge, to set up the open source product by yourself. If you're looking at deploying fast, usually it's yesterday, then spending some money on maybe licensing to get a more polished product might actually make sense. And in the end, it's the value that you deliver back to the business, right? If you don't spend money on licensing, but you spend the next 6 months trying to find the right configuration for the tool set, then that's, in my opinion, maybe not the wisest decision. And so, with one of the things that we get asked a lot is, should we use, in the case of Puppet, should we use Puppet open source or should we use the enterprise version? And I say, okay, what does your organization look like? Do you have 100 people sitting in your engineering department? Then you might look at generating the skill set to actually use the open source version. But if you have, I was speaking to a university in Holland the other day, and they had 10 people in their whole IT team, then it doesn't seem to be a very smart decision to go and figure out all of the things that are involved in making it run by yourself. So that's kind of the it's one of the things that can influence this this decision. The next topic, we've already touched on it a little bit, is on-premise versus cloud-based software. When I spoke about the chat software example in the beginning, there's a danger there, right? We now have a small engineering department somewhere using a tool in the cloud, and there's all kinds of concerns. There's shadow IT. You mentioned in the discussion earlier security concerns. What is being discussed on this software, and specifically in an engineering department, we're discussing infrastructure, core infrastructure things. Within my own company, we use HipChat as well as software, and every once in a while I have to smack someone over the head because they're distributing passwords through a chat interface, and this is a cloud-based tool, and that's not something I'm very happy about, but it does happen. And how do you stop that from happening, or is that, on what level do you need to be concerned about that? That's to me a very interesting trade-off.
So as an SI, for example, a lot of our obligations are actually, sort of tripartite, right? So there is a Microsoft who is a partner, or an IBM who is a partner, but there's also a lot of client data that we access and we are accountable for. And in some industries, for instance, right? I mean, you would have an FD or somebody like that coming behind you. I mean, the customer may leave you, but you would have a regulator coming after you. So it is really important that you have checks in place when you open up to a hosted environment, or when you have a lot of people accessing these environments, and purely from the perspective of security and privacy. I think if you have those checks in place, and if those checks are adequate based on what kind of contracts you have with your customers, I think, again, those are options that are definitely available, and today we are using a lot of those options as we speak.
Yeah, I mean, to bring it back closer a little bit to the DevOps discussion that we're having here today, I read an example of a company that, among a bunch of other things, had a marketing department, and when the marketing department requested a WordPress blog, they had to wait for 6 months because the IT department had to go and commission hardware somewhere, somebody had to plug in a cable in a data center somewhere. It was all horrible, and the whole thing would sit there for 6 months in a bunch of tickets, where eventually someone in the marketing department learned enough about AWS to run an instance there and install WordPress on it, and they bought a $20 theme, and off they were in not 6 months. And I think that one of the problems that we have to solve with our DevOps practices is the speed of this these deliverables for what we are actually there for, which is to support whatever the core business is of the company that we work for. We're not the engineering department. We are the engineering department of company XYZ.
Absolutely, and I think some of the apps are a very obvious choice. For example, in our case, Infosys.com runs on Azure, right? So on the Microsoft cloud. So that was an obvious choice. I mean, that's public information. You want people to be accessing it, seeing it, and all of that. But there are a lot of other apps which I don't see them ever going to Azure, right? So those are choices that you make based on what kind of apps you are dealing with. Some have gone to the public cloud. Some eventually will go, and others, obviously, for an SI, the terms become very different based on the commitments that you have with customers, what kind of data you handle for the customers, and what kind of obligations you carry.
Yeah, just to kind of add, from a workload perspective, leveraging cloud is quite useful, really useful at times. Especially from an India perspective, I think we do a lot of testing services. And if you are a tester, or if you've ever been a tester or worked in a testing division, It is quite important that we provision these environments. You know, we try and replicate the customer's environment because we're mostly into services, testing services. So that's the example I want to give. Now, if you have to really access the customer's environment, there's sensitive data at times, and you can't really, you know, fiddle with the data. So, which means the test cases are, like, you know, not really robust enough. Now, the other alternative, which has become mainstream, it was a concept like a few years back, but today it's really become mainstream. So as a test lead, that project manager, I could just go on to one of the cloud service providers. I don't want to use the word Azure, but any of the cloud service providers, right? Just churn up a couple of virtual machines, and then, you know, go and install whatever you want to install there. Pump in data. For example, if you have a SQL database or a data store in the back end, which is NoSQL, or it could be just, you know, blobs, for example, you could just go pump in all of this data, and there are such nice tools available, and you get your test environment in a jiffy, which was just not possible. And when we talk about testing services, and these are things that are you know, happening on the fly, and the testers are kind of, you know, just going and running the test cases. Use it, pay for what you use. So you don't have to really go beg your IT administrator and all of that stuff, right? So that's typically one example. The other example is from a cloud leveraging perspective. Enterprise is one angle, but what about startups? What about smaller organizations who are really constrained for costs? So in such a situation, there are these entire application lifecycle management tools available on the cloud, which means the way I would run these things on premise, I get the same thing on the cloud, which means I just go create the users, I get the entire, you know, system which manages my requirements, my test cases. I can pretty much, you know, manage all the, you know, the reporting. Everything is there. You could just go pay for it as much as you use. These are the benefits. And then you have the other aspects, which is like, you know, the disaster recovery, high availability, the data storage, you know, in the back end, something happens, you know, you have a Godzilla which comes to Bangalore, and, you know, there's like some crazy event that takes place, touch wood. The data is all stored, and there are very good SLAs, the 99.9, you know, 4 nines, 5 nines, you know, you see all of these different percentages. Lot of advantages, but you'll have to really think about whether your business really needs it or not. But cloud is something that we cannot neglect. Of course, from an enterprise perspective, I kind of agree there's a lot of security concerns, and, you know, so it's a gradual shift. But from a small, medium customer perspective, it's like, I think, getting leveraged on a regular basis and very rapidly. So that's...
The other shift in trend I see in a lot of customers is that earlier they wanted to manage their own deployments. Now they want managed as opposed to hosted, you know. Some customers want hosted, and they, you know, basically the regular cloud that you see. And other customers want the same tooling, but managed by the vendor on a virtual private cloud. So it's still cloud, but it's, you have the security of it being on your premise probably, and managed by a vendor that you trust. So that's, I don't know if the others have seen that, but we see quite a lot in our customer base.
This is interesting. To me, cloud is like the open source for software. Cloud is like open source for hardware. I don't have to wait for that Dell machine and sign that Dell contract when all I can do is go online and actually just provision a machine and get working with it. In fact, when I was talking in my session, I did allude to the fact that we've completely gone cloud for quite a bit of our products. And the only reason why it is, you know, insane number of releases that you hear, somebody doing like 9 releases a day, or for we do about a release every week. That's only possible, and Dr. Ganesh was also talking about it, is because of the presence of the cloud infrastructure, where we don't have to provision things and, you know, worry about getting things ready. It's just not the machines themselves, it's just the whole concept of configuration that you can just deliver, and the software is now capable of assembling the multiple pieces that are there. So with that capability, cloud, it really is a no-brainer. In terms of doing it in-premise, I kind of agree with Naresh in terms of when there are regulatory requirements. Europe has, I think, data requirements in terms of it cannot leave. We've had US big Snowden leaks talking about all that is going on. India, we have regulation around financial industry. I'm sure telecom guys would be very, very careful about that data as well. But then there is a case to be made about differentiating between data as an asset versus the process of DevOps, which is where you're actually delivering the code which makes that data go around. So there is this, to me, for DevOps, cloud is even a stronger proposition, purely because your application can, reside anywhere, but the data that it is accessing may be in a more secure location. Already there is a hybrid cloud that we talked about. So that is the way in terms of when you have the data. So every cloud provider has a way that you can tunnel into an infrastructure. So data stays safe, your process can move around. So for me, cloud is the default. And in case there is a regulatory requirement, then we kind of move somewhere else, especially from DevOps perspective.
Yeah, I think so. And this is, again, as you say, right, it's different for each organization. It depends on the parameters of the organization, whether you should be looking at cloud or on-premise or hybrid cloud or whichever you choose. An interesting part of that also is that once you have these self-service infrastructures, who becomes responsible for when things go wrong? Let's say that my marketing department can spin up their own instance, and now they don't do it secretly on AWS, but they do it on my OpenStack installation, for instance. What happens when that WordPress instance gets hacked because they installed some kind of plugin, and now operations department gets automatically the blame for this. So there's a certain level of control that you would like to have, and I see this in companies now, where the question is it about control or is it about being able to see what's going on, and where is the limit of what an operations department should dictate or should facilitate. Ideally, we want to just be facilitating so that we are not the roadblocks when it comes to these kind of setups. But on the other hand, in the end, there's always finger pointing, right? When something goes wrong, there's always a finger being pointed, and it's still important to make sure that that it's clear who is responsible for what, I think.
Another thing I've seen, at least in my organization, is that kind of a mandate of DevOps is that you try not to fail at a customer site or on your website, right? So what you do instead is that you build production environments into your testing tooling system. So for that, we use the virtual private cloud quite extensively. So basically, you develop your software and then you deploy it on virtualized environments in the cloud, which mimic your production and have your production data, and there you run the tests. So, quite apart from whether you want your tools hosted on the cloud or not, we found that for testing, having virtualized deployments in the cloud make a big difference to whether you're really testing in a production-like environment or like on your laptop on like I don't know, an open source database probably.
I think the only comment I wanted to make on, on what you said is if you see that you have shadow IT, that business actually start building things on their own, means that your effectiveness of your process is broken and you should fix it. If you see that the teams are not collaborating together, or the finger pointing means that your process is broken. So there are a lot of symptoms that we see in organizations that actually indicate that your process is broken, whether the solution is one way of resolving it or another, using open source or proprietary or whatever. I think it all comes down to try to understand and see why is it happening, why is actually we're not getting the type of benefits that we should be getting, and then drill deeper in terms of finding what's the best solution for this particular product. Very often the company that I work for is that we we made the shift from proprietary to open source, predominantly from a cost perspective. So at some point, we actually saw that switching from proprietary to open source would actually save us about like three times the cost. On the other hand, from an accounting perspective, if you actually need to capitalize more and actually put it in OPEX, then you actually end up saying, okay, from a financial perspective, we don't have a lot of choice. So it all comes back to, again, what are your criteria for success? What are your options that you can play with? And then make the best choice, the most effective choice, which is what we're talking about. The most effective chain will be dictated by your success or your effectiveness criteria that will be dictated from the business.
Yeah, and I think that with DevOps, we're actually going towards that much more than we were before. I see now IT departments that are actually thinking about, okay, how do we stand within this business? What is the company that this IT department is a part of? What is that company doing, and how can we best service that? And that's a major shift, I think.
Yeah, and that's also why sometimes on the internet you see the DevOps being called like Biz DevOps, in which you want to make an additional extension, because at the end it's a triangle. You're actually doing something for the business. Collaboration needs to be across all three. So at the end of the day, you need to provide a service, and if you're not providing the service up to the level of quality that you're actually expected to deliver, you get shadow IT, and that means that it's getting even worse.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, quick comment on that. So. I think you, somewhere in the middle of the discussion, you brought out a very important point on the outcomes. And teams look for outcomes, and they look for very specific outcomes. And I think a lot of these offshoots happen because they are unable to see the right.
You have to get on the table now.
Yeah. So it's time already, right? So the teams really look for those outcomes, and if those outcomes are not coming in at the pace that they want, they obviously begin to do their own things. And I think a lot of the IT teams have sort of turned the corner with bring your own device and all that. So I think they have faced these problems in a much bigger scale, and I think they have sort of learned from that. So today I don't think the DevOps tool chain or a choice of tool A versus tool B is something that really bothers the IT department. I mean, if it bothers the IT departments, it's really a big problem for them, really.
Yeah, I think that to summarize the discussion, where things have improved a lot with, and whether that is DevOps's fault or honor remains to be seen. But I think that things have improved a lot over the last 10 years, where a lot of companies have realized that the performance of their organization is very closely related to the performance of the IT organization. We are in a world where IT is so important for every single aspect of the day. The first thing I do in the morning when I wake up is turn on my phone to see whatever, to use technology. And I think that more and more businesses are realizing that by nurturing their IT departments, they will increase the performance of the business overall. And this, the current term we use for it is DevOps, but I was speaking to someone today, I don't remember who it was, but they said, I've been doing DevOps for 12 years, it's just that 2 years ago they thought of a term to name it, but really it's just a set of practices that enable a high-performance IT environment. So before we close this discussion, I would like to give some opportunity for you guys to ask some questions. If you have a specific question to a specific person, feel free to address that person specifically. If you want to address the panel as a whole, that's fine too. We have about 5 minutes, and then I'll do a little bit of closing, and then we wrap it up.
Can we have the mic there, please?
How is it that the people with the questions are always in the back? As far away as possible from the microphones.
Thank you. My question is for the entire panel. So many tools and many choices are there today for the DevOps teams to adopt the value chain of tools for driving the continuous integration to the continuous delivery. What are your thoughts? Are we confusing the developer and operations community? Or are we giving a unified platform for, okay, are we giving unified platform for the future? Do we see any kind of a convergence happening here?
So, can you, what is your exact question?
My question is, today we have so many tools and choices for the developer and operations team to consume and drive the things. But the choice is unlimited now. It is trying to confuse what tools to use, what time, where to use, and are we converging these tools at any point of time?
So one of the questions that have been asked to me specifically over the past few years is, Walter, should we use Chef or should we use Puppet? To which my answer is yes. You should be using one of the two. These days we are a bit further, so most people are already using some kind of configuration management, but the point is really to look at what you want to achieve with your business, and the list of requirements is different for everyone, right? Whether you put a lot of importance on having an API available, or whether you put a lot of importance on being able to run it on different desktop platforms, it depends on what your requirements are, and I think that should be the leading guide for which tool you choose specifically.
Also, so look at the larger objective. I think we should not really get too bogged down with individual tools. I think that's really not the idea. I think the larger idea should be, and I think it should start with this larger idea. Right? How do you envisage, or what kind of a vision do you set for the platform? And I think if it starts with that vision, you will figure out a way of getting the individual pieces in place. And the individual pieces are going to change. I mean, while we built our platform on Jenkins, I know that someday we'll have to rip apart Jenkins and put something else. And we are quite prepared for that. So I think individual tools really should not bog you down. Look at a larger vision when you start and sort of build towards that vision. I think that is the approach that I would always take.
Let me reword that question a little bit based on my simplicity that I used before. The actual question that you ask is that if you want to get married, do we need to speak French, Dutch, or English? That's exactly what you're saying. You have a myriad of languages. You have over hundreds of languages. What should you speak? Well, the language that you should speak is to make sure that you can communicate together. Otherwise, it ain't going to happen.
So it's funny. I just read, in one of the DevOps blogs that I was reading the other day, that DevOps is the exact antithesis of marriage because it's all about communication. Okay.
That's why during the break I was having a present interview and said, well, you probably actually saved some marriages today. So
all right. Any other questions? I think we have time for one more. All the way in the back, over there. I saw that hand was there 2 minutes ago. No, yeah. All the way in the back. All the way against the wall.
Can I ask?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, as the discussion went towards open source or proprietary, my question is on security. So there have been recently a lot of security breaches. So which approach bluffs the malware or malicious code while fixing bugs? Which, is it open source or enterprise software? Because I don't believe in hybrid, because it has to be either open source or enterprise. There can be no gray area. It has to be either one of them.
I think that to be honest, this discussion is a very old one, and it's never going to go away. In my opinion, it doesn't really matter whether it's open source or enterprise software. It matters what is the quality of the people who created it. There will be security issues with both open source as well as enterprise level software. I used to be, in the beginning of my career, an enterprise developer, and we would also come into, run into a bug or a security issue that had apparently been there for years and nobody noticed it. So whether that is, I don't think that the security should be, or that level of security concern should be guiding whether you choose open source or proprietary software, because the security issues will be there anyway. It's just a matter of whether they will be publicly disclosed or how they will be solved. The advantage I think that we've seen with the open source security issues was that in almost every situation, a fix was available that day. I am pretty sure that if we find security issues in some of the more exotic proprietary software, we will not have a fix the same day. It might be the same week or the same month, but so yeah, it's upsides and downsides in my opinion, and it should not be a guiding choice.
Yeah, also I think I also sort of touched upon it on Abhishek's point on licensing and all of that, right? So see, we are talking about tools here. These are accelerators. These are not going to be part of your app. So you should really worry about security, you know, where it's going to be part of your app. So you insert code into or instrument code into your app. Security becomes very important, very crucial. There you should not compromise, or you cannot compromise. With accelerators, I think you can take a a lot more lenient view, because these are not delivered. These are not going as part of your app. So while security is important even on accelerators, but they are not part of your app. They are more on the outside. They are just helping you do your work faster, better, and maybe cheaper at times. So look at that distinction. I think that will help you to decide.
All right, I see a big red sign there that says time's up, so I presume that means that time is actually up. First of all, or last of all, I guess, I wanted to thank all of you personally for being part of this panel. I think it was a very productive discussion, interesting viewpoints from all involved. The last thought that I wanted to leave you with was a point that Abhishek brought up in our discussion before the panel, and he asked, "What about DevOps for?" The things that we're discussing during this conference is mostly enterprise or traditional environments. We're looking at data centers, networking, maybe some desktops. It's a fairly traditional environment. What we're looking at next is Internet of Things, smart cities, these kind of things. How are we going to manage these kind of devices? Abhishek was pointing at Rupa's wrist. She's wearing a Fitbit, and this is a very simple piece of technology that could be managed. We have smartwatches, we have bring your own device, all of these things. They open up a whole new level of discussion for DevOps practices, and I think that that's something that we can maybe discuss while sharing a drink or dinner later.
Just one small comment on that one is the Clarive from out of Spain. We're actually being sponsored, or we actually have doing some research specifically around that Internet of Things, because it's a hot topic in Spain, and it's the next area where we like to take DevOps in that area.
So thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, for that informative and a very useful panel discussion, once again with a bigger round of applause, let's thank the panelists. And for moderating the session, we'll also thank the moderator. To thank the panelists, I would like to request Mr. Vijay Krishnamurthy from TCS to kindly come on stage. Let's welcome Mr. Vijay Krishnamurthy. I would request all the panelists to take your seats. We would like to thank you with a memento. Also requesting Mr. Charlie Key, the founder of Models, the Progress Company, also to kindly come on stage to present the memento to the panelists and to our moderator. Charlie, please, sir. Sir, once again, kindly take your seat, sir. We'd like to thank Mr. Naresh Chowdhury, our panelist for this evening. Once again, let's thank Mr. Naresh Chowdhury. He was a great speaker this morning and amazing panelist. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Abhishek Kant, the country manager. Thank you once again, sir. Mr. Eddy Pawels, thank you. Thank you for joining us and making this evening a very, very informative evening. Sreerupa Sen from IBM, thank you, ma'am. Mr. Tejasvi Kumar from Microsoft, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone. Kindly take your seat. From Clarive, I would like to request Sarah to please come on the stage. It's time to pick up the lucky name. To pick up the chit, I would like to request Mr. C. Venkata Subramaniam on stage, both of you. Yeah. The lucky dip, and the lucky winner is Mr. Robin Ravi. Congratulations. If you're not there, the prize, the luck moves on. Next, all right.
Next.
And the lucky winner. Mr. Ramesh B. Mr. Ramesh, you are around? No? Okay.
Maybe third time lucky. MS Daniel from Microgenesis.
Mr. MS Daniel.
Superb. Sham Mysis. Sham Mysis.
Sham is there. Congratulations with a big round of applause. Actually, a really lucky person. Congratulations to you, sir. Are we giving it?
Where are you heading? Yeah. Please come.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, sir. For vote of thanks and for closing, I would like to request Mr. Sivaguru to kindly come on stage.
Yeah, hope you had a good day today. I don't want to delay you any further. So let's meet tomorrow morning, 9:30 sharp. Yeah, thank you. In the meanwhile, if you have any suggestions, requests, please do share with any of us. We'll see how we can accommodate that tomorrow.
Thank you once again. Have a great evening. Thank you.